Welcome to the Bowden Blitz SEC edition. I'm Joe Lisi, joined by former National Coach of the Year, Terry Bowden. Coach, the AP Top 25 came out throughout the offseason, and the conference has 4 of the top 10 teams there right at the start of the regular season. Can the SEC get back and win a national championship in 2025?
Well, they got more chances because not only do they have 4 in the top 10, they've got 10 in the top 25. Big Ten has 6, and it goes down from there. When you have that many teams sitting around the top 15 to top 20, you got a better chance of getting somebody in. And I think anybody up from Alabama, from Texas to Alabama to Georgia, you can kind of pick them. Then you've got LSU sitting there right on the edge possibility. Even some people are talking Ole Miss, but you got 3 real contenders. I think they've got more than anybody else. So, yes, I do think they can get back in the national championship game. They've got several teams with enough talent, not just to get to the playoffs, but win once they get there.
When you talk about Arch Manning and you talk about hype, it's not just on his Heisman Trophy odds at the start of the year. He's a 7-1 shot to win the hardware, but it's on this team as a whole. And Steve Sarkisian got them to back-to-back college football playoff appearances. But putting them as number 1 overall in the coaches in the AP poll, that's a little bit overhyped, isn't it?
I think people are enamored with this whole Arch Manning at Texas thing. It's such an incredible family of football. You just like people have, I bet Terry Bowden's going to do what Bobby Bowden did. Unfortunately, Terry Bowden couldn't do what Bobby Bowden did. Arch Manning is such a big name, has got so many people excited. I think he elevates Texas. I think Texas is one of the top 5 teams. I don't think they're favored over Ohio State. I don't think they'll be favored over Georgia. But they think they are one of the top 5 teams. And they do have enough talent. If Arch Manning can just be a great manager, a great leader, he does not have to have the talent of his 2 uncles or his grandfather. If he just goes out there and manages the football team, they can get to that championship game. But I'm saying is, I think a lot of the hype for Texas is about Arch Manning, because I could see them going 9-3 if things don't fall their way in a couple of tight ball games.
It all starts week number 1 on the road in a rematch with Ohio State. To Coach's point, the Longhorns are 2.5-point road dogs in that matchup. We'll be breaking down that week 1 battle next week on the Bowden Blitz. But you mentioned something. Terry Bowden couldn't do something Bobby Bowden couldn't do. Well, you just got your first national championship, Coach, with Auburn coming out this past week and saying and claiming that they're claiming 4 national championships, and one of them are the 1993 season where you went undefeated. You were on probation that year. But how does it feel, and what are your thoughts about Auburn claiming those 4 national championships?
Well, considering I'm not behind the push, I'm kind of excited about it. You know, back in '91 and before, there were always, quite often, 2 champions. Remember, Colorado, Georgia Tech combined to both be named national champions. And before that, every year they had different services that picked different champions. Now, Auburn's got to live in the same state as Alabama. And Alabama has about 8 national championships back in the day when you had 2 or 3 champions. And Auburn never recognized that. So I'm awful glad they did. But I think my father's rolling over in his grave because you know who won the national championship in '93? My old man won the championship. But you know what? We ended up being the only undefeated team. We ended up beating the defending champion Alabama. We were on probation. We couldn't be in the bowl game. And the kids supposedly had nothing to play for. And we went out there and won every single ball game. And so I'm glad they're getting that credit. I think a little bit of that's an Auburn, Alabama thing, but you know what? It's awful nice to see those boys being recognized for having one of the great years in Auburn history.
And the other notable was Jason Campbell, Cadillac Williams, and Ronnie Brown with Tommy Tuberville. He came out as well and said he thought they were one of the best teams and the best team during that season as well. The other news surrounding the SEC is the potential to go to a 9-game conference schedule. What are your thoughts about that? Because, again, I've always said and argued that the SEC doesn't fear anybody. They come right out of the gate. You look at the week one matchups this year, Alabama, Florida State. You got LSU and Clemson. Last year, Georgia, Clemson squared off. The Bulldogs squared off a couple of years ago with Oregon. What are your thoughts as a whole about the SEC possibly adapting a 9-game conference schedule?
Well, you know what? I do think the Big Ten and the SEC ought to both do the same thing. And they're not doing the same thing, whether it be 8 or 9 games. I would be very comfortable with them going to 9 games. However, I do like these big marquee games, Ohio State and Texas, games like Clemson and LSU. I don't think we'll have these. If we go to 9, you're going to see less chance of having these top teams from different conferences play each other. So there's some give, there's some take. But I do think whether it be the SEC or the Big Ten, if they agree to 9 out of both of them, ought to play 9 conference games, and then maybe agree to play each other.
The other aspect I wanted to bring up is we saw Kirby Smart in Georgia win back-to-back national championships. The last time the Bulldogs won the hardware was 3 years ago. We saw Michigan and Ohio State, respectively, win national championships over the past couple of years. The Big Ten now is the big dogs on the block. But is it harder in this current landscape for teams to build a potential dynasty, even in the SEC, the way Nick Saban did it for basically 15 years?
I think it's getting harder and harder. The problem is because I know in my last 3 years of coaching, where I just retired after the 23 season, we hit portal transfer and we hit NIL back to back. Now, if you build a team, you're going to lose your best players if somebody can outbid you for a football player. It's harder to take your background, your history, your knowledge of how to manage and build a football team and to keep that going. You've got to now change because you're going to lose half your team through attrition that didn't normally come except by graduation or the NFL. So I do think it's harder for a team to go out there and year after year after year be in the championship. But what I do like is there are teams that now can be right back in the championship hunt that have never been there, even if it is because they pay a little bit of money for NIL. They can get players and be in the hunt. We're seeing Oregon's jumped up front. Ole Miss got right in the hunt. Miami got back in the ball game. All this was done through the NIL and portal transfer.
Well, one of the teams that we're going to talk about when we break down the odds perspective are the Tennessee Volunteers, a 10-win football team, lost to the Ohio State Buckeyes in the first round of the college football playoff. Their quarterback, Nico, is now the starting quarterback potentially at UCLA. They get in the transfer, Joey Aguilar from App State. How hard is it for a transfer to basically hit the ground running in a potentially new scheme?
He's got to have the right kind of talent. Now, I've studied Tennessee. Their quarterback, I coached against him when he was at App State. I coached against him when I was at ULM. He's a very talented quarterback. But for Tennessee to have the right quarterback, he must be extremely accurate on the deep ball. They haven't had that since 2022. He's got to be extremely accurate on the deep ball. They haven't had that perfectly with Nico last year, or we'll have to see how that goes this year. But that's very important for a quarterback to hit the ground running. He's got to have that instinct for throwing a great deep ball.
You talk about Tennessee right now. Their win total is 8.5. They do have plus money to the over at plus 118. We'll also talk about some other teams. Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss, huge expectations. They had everything for the taking last year with Jackson Dart. They walked into the swamp, and Jackson Dart had one of his worst performances all of last season, throwing 2 critical interceptions, getting outplayed by DJ Lagway. Austin Simmons now comes with a lot of hype. This team has an 8.5 win total. Can Ole Miss be that team potentially in the conference? We'll come back and we'll break down those odds now on the Bowden Blitz. Joe Lisi, Coach Bowden, breaking down conference odds and, more importantly, the big game on tap later in the week, Auburn. Baylor. Can Auburn make a statement in Waco? We're coming right back on the Bowden Blitz. Keep it where it is. All right, back on the Bowden Blitz. Joe Lisi, Coach Bowden, breaking down SEC odds. We talked about the Tennessee Volunteers and Josh Heupel, 8.5 win total. This was a team that was a 10-win program last year, made it to the college football playoff, but couldn't run the football consistently, and they lost in dominating fashion to the Ohio State Buckeyes. Coach, this team last year was 7-0 at home, and they won against FBS opponents by an average margin of victory of 28.1 points per game. But starting quarterback Nico is gone. Dylan Sampson is gone. How important is the rushing attack for the success of Joey Aguilar in that offense this year?
Yeah, it's always important when you bring a new quarterback in. And again, in an offense where he has to be able to throw the ball accurately for them to be successful, that happens by having a good running game to run with their offense. And I think that's so important. I've said that several times already, that the great quarterback needs a running game to complement his throwing because it puts him in better situations. You get a team that does not run the ball well, they get down the second half, quarterback presses, second half interceptions. Throwing a lot of third and longs as opposed to third and short and third and mediums, that's a problem for the quarterback. So Tennessee, again, they've got to continue to run that football. But I will say this again. If they want to get back to the incredible offense that Josh Heupel had in 2022, they've got to be able to run the ball and hit the deep ball. Run the ball and hit the deep ball. And what happens, those quarterbacks come in and they overthrow so many open receivers, it changes the effect of that offense. If you remember back in 22, the deep ball was incredible, and yet they've had a hard time getting quarterbacks that consistently hit it that goes with their offense.
I agree. And I think when you look at this team overall, I think they're slightly up against it. They could potentially, if they overexceed expectations, get to 9 wins, but I think they're more in the area of 8-4 overall. Yeah. We'll see how it plays out in Knoxville. They do have a very difficult, in my opinion, road schedule. So we'll see if the Volunteers can live up to expectations in 2025. I mentioned Lane Kiffin. I really thought they were the team to potentially be that dark horse like Tennessee last year. I thought they had everything for the taking, and then the road performances by Jackson Dart were just not up to par. Now they get Austin Simmons. They come now with an 8.5 win total. Lane Kiffin has done a fantastic job, but you lose Trey Harris, you lose Ulysses Bentley, their starting running back, and Walter Nolan on the defensive side of the ball. Lane Kiffin built up the defense last year, one of the best rush defenses in all of college football, allowing only 80 rushing yards per game. Can Ole Miss potentially get to a 10-win season this year?
Yeah, I think they can. I think Ole Miss, they underachieved last year. I think of all the teams in college football, they underachieved. Look at them. They had a first-round draft pick at quarterback. They had incredible defense. I went to the Georgia-Ole Miss game in Oxford. It was clear Ole Miss had the better athletes on the team. And when you've got better athletes in Georgia, you need to be playing for the national championship. Now, the thing that Lane Kiffin does, he does a great job in the portal. Maybe one of the best coaches in the country for going through and recruiting the portal. He's loaded again, and he's got an exciting quarterback. And you've got kind of the monkey off his back. You don't have everybody talking about Ole Miss this year. I think this is a great year. If you had to pick a dark horse, not just in the SEC, but maybe to make a run during the college football playoffs, it might just need to be Ole Miss.
How hard is it to coach JUCO and transfer talent? Maybe when it's 1 or 2 players, but let's say it's more than that. Let's say it's like 5 to 7 or 8 to 10 on a starting unit, offensively and defensively. For those players to gel cohesively, is that a harder fix as a head coach potentially, or is it just all systems go because they're young players and they can adapt?
Well, you know what? It's changed so much. College football has changed. I was a head coach starting in 1983. And for the first 30 years, it was like a no-no to get too many JC transfers, because you weren't developing them. They didn't learn the system, and you could get too many. But with the inclusion of the portal transfer and NILs, your roster changes every year. What's happened, the great teams learn to keep it simple, stupid. They keep a basic defensive scheme in, a basic offensive scheme, so you can plug in different people and they won't have to learn so much. They won't have to matriculate or learn the system as they go. They can jump right in and be effective that way. So that's just the way it is now. Wasn't like that when I did most of my coaching. You had to build your football team. You had to develop your quarterback. If you do that now, you're probably developing half of them for somebody else.
A quarterback that I'm very high on, but the team doesn't have high expectations, is Sam Pittman and Arkansas. They have a 5.5 win total this year. They got to a bowl game. They stepped up and dominated Texas Tech. But when you look at this team as a whole, Taylon Green is an under-the-radar guy. He could take games over with his arm, with his legs. They do have sophomore running back Braylon Russell returning, and they're very physical on the offensive line. Depth could be an issue defensively, but I think this team has the potential to be an 8 or a 9-win football team this year.
Yeah, it's funny. We look at the SEC, and we talk each time we get to a team, we talk about how strong they are. But their best bet might be 6 or 7 wins. There's just a lot of teams that even if they play very good, you might just see 7. Now, you said 8 or 9, but the likelihood may be just 7, maybe even 6, a bowl season. But I'm not sure Sam Pittman can save his job winning 6, maybe 7, probably needs 8.
If he does lose his job, I've heard, potential big-name coaches. Could they get a coach like John Gruden that goes from the NFL ranks, is now basically in broadcasting, to come back to at least rejuvenate the program?
Well, John Gruden's let it know that he would love to coach in the SEC. So I think there's a few teams out there, because he's such a young coach and a young-looking coach with energetic. His whole personality and style fits the SEC, fits that energy and that excitement. I could see him doing a very good job with an SEC team. I'm a Sam Pittman fan. I hope he pulls it off and stays at Arkansas and does well. But John Gruden, he's going to end up somewhere. If he had his way, it would be in the SEC.
The one thing that Arkansas does is they cover the spread as it relates to the sports wagering perspective. Sam Pittman and the Arkansas Razorbacks are an underdog, or almost a lock at times, to cover that number. We'll come back with the big game in the conference, Auburn Baylor, coming up next. There's a battle brewing in Waco, Texas next week. It's Auburn on the road, a 2.5-point road favorite against the Baylor Bears. Baylor started last year, coach 2-4, but they ripped off 6 straight wins, winning by an average margin of victory of 14.8 points per game before they lost in the bowl matchup to LSU 44-31. I know everybody looking at Auburn and Hugh Freeze to step up and make a statement. I actually think Baylor could strike the upset as a home dog later next week.
They definitely can do it. I think Auburn's going to kind of pull it together. Hugh Freeze gotten back to the wall. 2 losing seasons. Auburn's had 4 straight losing seasons. Haven't gone to 5 straight since World War II. This whole offseason was not focused on the SEC. It was focused on Baylor. Because what you got Ball State, you got South Alabama. You could be 3-0, which is what you've got to be going into Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Georgia after that. And so this is a critical game for Auburn, and I think they prepared a lot of the offseason for what they've got to do against Baylor.
You and I talked earlier in the episode on the breakdown when we broke down the SEC about how he deviated from his former offensive philosophy with Malik Willis and Caden Salter. The other factor as well, when you just look at the offense and team as a whole, very undisciplined, coach. They were -9 in turnover margin. Yeah. And I know a lot of people and pundits will say, well, that can't be coached up. That's basically just the bounce of the ball. That's not true. Good coaches basically coach ball security. And when you're not winning the turnover battle offensively, defensively, each and every week, that's a problem.
You're going to lose. You're not going to win ball games. But let me say this. It is coaching. If you look at the caused fumbles, Coaching causes fumble. How to strip the ball. How to put your helmet on the ball. Causing a fumble is coached. Recovering a fumble sometimes is luck. The ball bounces a funny way, but when you watch how many fumbles are caused, you can coach that. And if you cause more, you're going to get more. And obviously, if you learn to play defensive back with your eyes to the ball, a little more zone, maybe a little less man, where you can get your eyes on the ball, you can mix it up well, disguise the quarterback. You've got to create those turnovers, because turnovers end up being huge in a tight season. That was as big a reason they lost last year as anything. The second thing, or maybe the first thing tied, is the play of the quarterback was not good last year. Jackson Arnold is a gamble that he took, that this one better succeed.
And Jackson Arnold, if you watch the big matchups last year against Tennessee, he got pulled for Michael Hawkins in the second half. He stepped up against Ole Miss. The team was within striking distance. They were down by 12 points. He couldn't lead his team in the second half to points in that matchup. He is going to be learning a new scheme, and that is basically a lot of pressure on him and Ashton Daniels, the former Stanford quarterback. We heard Hugh Freeze come out and say he's potentially going to utilize 3 quarterbacks in this matchup. That's a lot of pressure for each and every one, isn't it, Coach? And when you look at the flip side for Baylor, Sawyer Robertson is a really experienced quarterback. 28 touchdowns, only 8 interceptions. This is a team that averaged 261 passing yards per game. You would have to give the offensive edge to the more experienced quarterback in Baylor, wouldn't you?
I think you would, but again, overall picture, Jackson Arnold, was he the problem, or was the offensive scheme at Oklahoma the problem? Anytime a head coach takes over like Brent Venables and he's a defensive coach, you've got to hope he can hire the right coordinator, and now he's gone through his coordinators. I got to hope that what you've got to hope is Jackson Arnold is in a system where he could be successful. Can we tell you, with Cam Coleman and Singleton at wide receiver, he's got as good receivers as anybody. Auburn's talent level better than Baylor. Baylor's quarterback situation more stable.
How important is home field for Baylor in this matchup? Auburn going into Big 12 country in this battle. Do you see that being a factor at all?
I don't know. I've called ball games at Baylor. I've called games as an announcer, but I haven't coached in that stadium. I just don't think of that as one of the stadiums around the country that intimidates people. I think so. Usually if you go to a stadium, you hear about the ones that are very intimidating. So I'm not sure that's going to be a factor. Anybody that coaches in the SEC, every week you go to stadiums that are as dynamic and as tough to win as anywhere in the country.
Look for Baylor to potentially run the football. Dawson Pendergrass is out. One of their running backs from last year, it'll be Bryson Washington with a bulk of the carries. They average 178 rushing yards per game. I like Baylor to win the game outright. Coach, you lean into Auburn in that matchup?
Yeah, I am leaning to Auburn just because, like I say, Hugh Freeze has got a proven record everywhere he's been, from Lambeth College to Ole Miss to Liberty. He has won. I think he digs deep and finds a way to get Auburn back on track.
We'll see you next week on the Bowden Blitz.